The people who laugh the loudest before the first shot are usually the quietest after it. Nobody standing on range 11 that morning understood how true those words were about to become. Fort Redstone stirred awake beneath a cool spring sunrise. Thin layers of mist floated across the distant hills while rows of steel targets stood motionless beneath the pale morning light. The smell of damp earth mixed with gun oil drifted through the air as instructors unlocked equipment lockers and maintenance crews prepared another demanding day of long-range qualification. Everything felt routine. Predictable. Exactly the way military mornings were supposed to begin. Private First Class Claire Morgan entered through the range gate carrying a long precision rifle case across one shoulder. She walked alone. 29 years old, fair-skinned, with blonde hair neatly secured beneath her patrol cap and calm blue eyes that never searched for attention. Her combat uniform showed the subtle wear of countless field exercises, but every strap was adjusted perfectly, every button secured, every movement deliberate. Nothing about her appearance demanded notice. She never looked around to see who was watching. She simply crossed the gravel toward her assigned firing point. After placing the rifle case gently on the shooting mat, Claire released the latches one by one. Inside rested a precision rifle secured inside custom-cut foam. She lifted it carefully. Checked the chamber. Inspected the bolt. Verified the optic mount. Extended the bipod. Every motion flowed naturally into the next. Not hurried. Not exaggerated. Simply practiced. Several nearby soldiers gradually noticed. Corporal Tyler Brooks leaned against an ammunition crate while watching her from several yards away. "Who's the new transfer?" One recruit answered, "She's joining the sniper section." Tyler looked again. Then laughed. "No chance." Another soldier frowned. "That's her." Tyler folded his arms. "You're a sniper." His voice carried farther than he expected. More soldiers turned toward Claire. One smirked. "I've carried heavier backpacks than she weighs." Another laughed. "Maybe she's here to observe." Someone else added, "Or maybe she's lost." The group burst into laughter. Claire never reacted. She calmly adjusted the sling attached to the rifle before removing a small notebook from her cargo pocket. Inside were neatly written range notes. Wind observations. Elevation data. Nothing else. Tyler walked closer. "You hear us?" Claire looked up. "Yes." Her answer was polite. "Quiet. Nothing more." Tyler smiled. "So. You really expect us to believe you're a sniper?" Claire held his eyes for only a brief moment. "I don't expect anyone to believe anything." Then she calmly returned her attention to the rifle. No argument. No explanation. No attempt to defend herself. The silence that followed somehow felt heavier than the laughter. From the elevated observation platform overlooking the range, Master Sergeant Robert Hayes watched everything through a pair of binoculars. Nearly 3 decades of training marksmen had taught him one lesson above all others. The soldiers most eager to convince everyone how capable they were usually weren't. He lowered the binoculars slowly. Claire Morgan continued inspecting her rifle exactly as though the conversation had never happened. Hayes smiled quietly. There was something deeply familiar about that kind of confidence. The kind that never introduced itself. Because it trusted the first bullet to do that instead. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't changing people's opinions. It's changing the way they treat the next person they meet. A month after the qualification on Range 11, Fort Redstone welcomed another class of sniper candidates. The valley looked exactly as it always had. Morning fog drifted across the hills. Wind flags fluttered above the firing lanes. Steel targets waited silently beneath the rising sun. Only the people had changed. Corporal Tyler Brooks stood beside the registration table helping the new arrivals organize equipment. One young recruit looked toward the firing line where Claire Morgan quietly prepared rifles for the day's training. He leaned toward Tyler and whispered, "Who's she?" Tyler smiled to himself. Months earlier, he would have answered very differently. Instead, he simply said, "Watch." The recruit looked confused. "That's it?" Tyler nodded. "That's all you need." Across the range, Claire moved from one firing position to another. She checked rifle slings, adjusted bipods, repositioned sandbags. She greeted every soldier exactly the same way. No matter their rank. No matter their experience. One nervous recruit struggled to settle behind the rifle. Claire knelt beside him. She didn't touch the trigger. She didn't lecture. She simply adjusted the position of his support hand. "Relax your shoulder." The recruit nodded. He fired. The steel target rang clearly downrange. His face lit up. "I actually hit it." Claire smiled softly. "You did." She stood and quietly walked to the next firing point before he could thank her again. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes observed everything from the tower. Colonel Nathan Brooks joined him. "They all respect her now." Hayes smiled. "They don't respect the shot. They respect the consistency." Nathan watched Claire continue helping the next recruit. "She never acts like she's the best shooter here." Hayes folded his arms. "That's why they believe she probably is." Later that afternoon, Tyler approached Claire while she packed away her rifle. "I've been thinking." She looked up. "Dangerous habit." He laughed. "I know." He hesitated. "I almost kept someone else from making the same mistake I made." Claire closed the last latch on her rifle case. "You didn't." Tyler looked surprised. "I didn't." She shook her head gently. "You stopped them before they made it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The afternoon breeze moved quietly across the empty firing range. Tyler finally smiled. "I guess that's progress." Claire nodded. "It is." She lifted the rifle case onto her shoulder. Then quietly started walking toward the parking area. The new recruits instinctively stepped aside to let her pass. Not because anyone told them to. Not because of her rank. Because respect had become something they chose to give. As the sun settled behind the distant hills, Tyler watched her disappear into the golden light. He realized the first bullet had done much more than strike a steel target. It had shattered assumptions. It had humbled pride. And it had quietly reminded an entire battalion that true professionals never need to convince anyone who they are. They simply live in a way that makes the answer impossible to ignore. The echo of one bullet eventually disappeared. The lesson it carried never did. Nearly a year passed. Fort Redstone welcomed another generation of soldiers with the same polished boots, fresh uniforms, and quiet determination that every military career seemed to begin with. Some arrived confident. Some arrived uncertain. Most believed they already understood what made a great sniper. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes gathered the newest class on Range 11 just after sunrise. The valley looked exactly as it had the morning Claire Morgan first arrived. The same ridgeline. The same steel target standing against pale stone. The same wind drifting through the tall grass. Hayes rested one hand on the observation rail. "Before we begin," he said calmly, "forget everything you think confidence looks like." The recruits exchanged puzzled glances. He pointed toward the firing line. Claire Morgan was already there. She wore the same weathered combat uniform. Carried the same rifle case. Followed the same careful routine she had practiced every morning for years. She checked the chamber. Verified the optic. Adjusted the bipod. Nothing had become faster. Nothing had become more dramatic. Success had changed her reputation. It had never changed her habits. Nearby, Corporal Tyler Brooks stood beside the newest soldiers. One recruit watched Claire for a moment before whispering, "Is that the sniper everyone talks about?" Tyler smiled quietly. "Yes." The recruit frowned. "She doesn't look like she wants anyone to notice." Tyler nodded. "Exactly." He remembered another morning. Another version of himself. The laughter. The jokes. The certainty that appearances told the whole story. Now he understood how wrong he had been. The day's training began. Claire spent the next several hours moving from lane to lane, helping inexperienced shooters solve small problems before they became larger ones. She adjusted a support bag. Corrected a breathing rhythm. Showed one recruit how to watch the movement of distant grass instead of staring only at the target. Each lesson lasted less than a minute. Each student improved. She never raised her voice. She never reminded anyone what she had accomplished. Colonel Nathan Brooks observed from the tower. Master Sergeant Hayes joined him. Nathan watched Claire patiently helping another recruit. The remarkable shot wasn't her greatest achievement. Hayes smiled. "I know. It was what she chose to do afterward." As the afternoon sun settled over the valley, training finally ended. The recruits packed their equipment. Steel targets stood quietly beneath the fading light. Claire closed the latches on her rifle case and started walking toward the parking area. The newest soldiers instinctively stepped aside to let her pass. Not because of rank. Not because anyone had ordered them to. Because respect had become the natural response to the person she proved herself to be every single day. Years later, few people would remember the exact distance of the target. Some would forget the weather. Others would forget the date. But everyone who had stood on range 11 remembered one simple truth. The laughter came before the first bullet. The respect came after it. And what earned that respect was never just extraordinary marksmanship. It was the quiet discipline, unwavering humility, and steady character of a soldier who never needed to announce who she was. Her actions had already done that. The valley decides long before the shooter does. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes stepped into the center of range 11 carrying a weathered clipboard beneath one arm. Behind him, the distant steel silhouette shimmered against the rocky hillside, barely visible through rising waves of heat. He looked across the assembled marksmen. Today's qualification has one purpose. He paused. To find out who trusts preparation more than pressure. The firing line became silent. Hayes pointed toward the target. 1,800 meters. Several experienced shooters narrowed their eyes. The target looked impossibly small. Orange wind flags stretched across the valley, each moving at a different pace. Dust drifted slowly across the nearest ridge. While the taller grass farther downrange leaned in another direction entirely. The civilian range engineer adjusted his spotting scope. 3 separate wind zones. Changing constantly. Staff Sergeant Daniel Miller quietly nodded. Nobody's going to solve that by guessing. Hayes continued reading from the qualification board. 1 round. No sighting shots. No second attempt. The first bullet is the only one that counts. The first marksman settled behind his rifle. He checked his ballistic chart. Adjusted his elevation. Controlled his breathing. The rifle thundered. Every eye followed the invisible bullet. Nothing. The spotting officer spoke calmly. Mississippi. Another experienced shooter stepped forward. Another careful setup. Another disciplined trigger press. Again. No impact. Low. The third shooter drifted wide right. The fourth struck dirt several yards short of the steel. Each miss made the silence heavier. The confidence that had filled the range only minutes earlier slowly disappeared. Corporal Tyler Brooks folded his arms. "I thought these guys were supposed to be the best. No one answered him. Not anymore. At the end of the firing line, Claire Morgan remained beside her rifle. She never reached for the laminated ballistic card clipped to the stock. She never opened a calculator. Instead, she watched the valley. Her eyes followed a narrow ribbon of dust rising from the western ridge. She noticed tall grass bending gently halfway to the target while sparse brush farther away leaned in the opposite direction. A hawk circled above the canyon before gliding into another current of air. Daniel Miller wasn't watching the target anymore. He was watching Claire. She's reading the terrain. The civilian engineer quietly corrected him. She's reading everything between herself and the target. Master Sergeant Hayes checked the clipboard. Only one name remained. Private First Class Claire Morgan. The conversation stopped instantly. Claire lifted her rifle and walked toward the firing position without a trace of hesitation. She lowered herself into the prone position. The bipod settled firmly into the gravel. Her cheek rested naturally against the stock. She looked through the optic. Then she waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. A young recruit whispered, "Why isn't she shooting?" Hayes answered without taking his eyes off her. "Because she's waiting for the valley to make up its mind." Almost immediately, the nearest wind flag softened. The drifting dust shifted. The hawk leveled its wings. Claire exhaled halfway. Her finger tightened with slow, even pressure. The trigger broke. The rifle roared. The report rolled across the valley like distant thunder. Claire never lifted her head from the stock. She remained behind the scope. Watching. Waiting. One heartbeat. Then another. Finally. A sharp metallic ring echoed back from the distant hillside. The steel target swung hard beneath the impact. No one spoke. Because the first bullet had answered every question the laughter had asked. One remarkable shot can earn admiration. The habits behind it earn something far more valuable. For several moments after the steel target rang across the valley, nobody spoke. The echo drifted slowly back through the hills before fading into silence. Claire Morgan remained behind her rifle. She never looked toward the crowd. She never searched for anyone's reaction. Instead, she stayed behind the scope until the distant target stopped moving completely. Only then did she lift her head. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes broke the silence. "Clear your weapon." Claire nodded. She opened the bolt with practiced precision. The spent brass casing rose gently into the air. Without taking her eyes off the rifle, she caught it cleanly before it touched the gravel. She inspected the chamber once. Then again. Satisfied, she stood. The civilian range engineer lowered his spotting scope slowly. "I've watched this qualification for 12 years. His voice remained quiet. "I've seen people hit farther targets." He looked toward Claire. "I've rarely seen anyone make a difficult shot look so ordinary." Staff Sergeant Daniel Miller smiled. "That's because she wasn't trying to impress anyone." Across the firing line, Tyler Brooks stared toward the distant steel plate. His arms slowly unfolded. The confidence that had carried him through the morning had quietly disappeared. He remembered every joke. Every laugh. Every careless assumption. None of them felt very large anymore. Claire brushed a thin layer of dust from the rifle before returning it to the armorer with both hands. The armorer accepted it respectfully. Neither of them said a word. Colonel Nathan Brooks stepped from the observation platform and accepted the evaluation clipboard from Master Sergeant Hayes. "So." He glanced down the score sheet. "Who solved the range?" Hayes pointed toward Claire. "Private First Class Claire Morgan, sir." Nathan looked up. She was already placing the empty brass casing into a small pouch before securing the latches on her rifle case. He watched her carefully. Not the score. The habits. The patience. The discipline. Finally, he extended his hand. Bring me her personnel file. An administrative clerk immediately hurried toward headquarters. Daniel Miller noticed the colonel's expression. You recognized something. Nathan nodded slowly. I recognized the way she handled that rifle. Hayes looked surprised. You've seen it before. The colonel kept watching Claire. Years ago. The best instructors all moved exactly like that. No wasted movement. No unnecessary speed. Every action already decided before it happened. Tyler overheard enough of the conversation to realize this story wasn't over. Whatever had made Claire different. It had begun long before she arrived at Fort Redstone. Nathan folded the score sheet beneath one arm. The shot impressed me. He looked toward the empty firing position. But the preparation interested me far more. Claire quietly walked toward the armory carrying her rifle case across one shoulder. She never looked back. She didn't need to. Because the first bullet had already introduced her better than any words ever could. Some names become respected because of a single remarkable day. The greatest ones stay respected because every ordinary day afterward looks exactly the same. The afternoon sun settled low over Fort Redstone as the activity on Range 11 slowly came to an end. Armorers secured rifles inside reinforced cases. Instructors collected score sheets. The distant steel target still stood against the hillside where one impossible first-round impact had quietly rewritten every opinion formed that morning. Claire Morgan carried her rifle case toward the armory. She walked with the same calm stride she had shown before anyone knew her name. Colonel Nathan Brooks watched her disappear through the doorway. A few moments later, an administrative clerk returned carrying the personnel file. Nathan opened it carefully. Training history. Qualification records. Deployment summaries. Every page reflected consistency rather than spectacle. Then one entry caught his attention. He smiled. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes noticed immediately. You found it. Nathan nodded. I knew those habits belonged to someone. He turned the folder slightly. Advanced Precision Mentorship Program Instructor, Lieutenant Colonel James Morgan, retired. Hayes folded his arms. Her father? No. Nathan smiled. Her grandfather. He trained some of the finest precision shooters this army ever produced. Daniel Miller quietly joined them. I've heard stories about him. Nathan nodded. He taught one lesson above everything else. Daniel waited. The target is never your opponent. Nathan looked across the valley. Your impatience is. Silence settled over the observation platform. Tyler Brooks stood only a short distance away. He hadn't meant to overhear the conversation. But every word stayed with him. Suddenly Claire's quiet confidence made perfect sense. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't mystery. It was the product of thousands of disciplined repetitions taught by someone who believed preparation mattered more than recognition. Nathan carefully closed the personnel file. I've seen extraordinary talent before. He looked toward the armory. Talent impresses people. He paused. Discipline changes them. Inside the armory, Claire carefully cleaned her rifle exactly as she always did. Every movement remained slow. Methodical. Intentional. No celebration. No conversation about the shot. To her, today had simply been another opportunity to do the job correctly. Tyler quietly stepped inside. Claire looked up. He hesitated. I wanted to say something. She waited patiently. I judged you before I knew anything about you. Claire smiled gently. You know something now. Tyler nodded. I know enough. He extended his hand. I was wrong. Claire shook it firmly. No speeches. No dramatic forgiveness. Just a simple handshake between two soldiers. Master Sergeant Hayes happened to see it from across the room. He smiled quietly. Some lessons never needed an instructor standing in front of a classroom. As evening settled across the base, Claire lifted the rifle case onto her shoulder and walked toward another ordinary tomorrow. The remarkable shot had earned everyone's attention. The way she carried herself afterward earned something far more difficult to achieve. Respect that no longer depended on a single bullet. Respect built one disciplined choice at a time. Some people earn respect because of one extraordinary moment. The rare ones keep earning it long after everyone stops talking about that moment. Several weeks passed. Fort Redstone returned to its familiar rhythm. Morning formations. Long hours on the range. Equipment inspections before sunrise. New soldiers replaced those who transferred to other assignments. Life moved forward. Claire Morgan moved with it. Every morning she arrived before the instructors. Every evening she was among the last to leave. Nothing about her routine suggested she had become the most talked about marksman on the base. Corporal Tyler Brooks noticed that more than anyone. One morning, while walking across Range 11, he found Claire kneeling beside a nervous new recruit struggling to settle behind a precision rifle. She adjusted the support bag slightly. Moved the recruit's elbow only a few inches. Relax your breathing. The recruit nodded. Fired. The distant steel answered with a clean metallic ring. His face immediately brightened. I hit it. Claire smiled politely. You did. She never mentioned that her small correction had made the difference. She simply walked toward the next firing position. Tyler watched quietly. Finally, he caught up with her. Can I ask you something? Claire looked over. Of course. You've become the best shooter on this base. She smiled faintly. I don't know about that. You do. Tyler laughed softly. So why don't you ever act like it? Claire stopped walking for a moment. She looked across the valley where the morning wind bent the distant grass. My grandfather taught me something. Tyler waited. If you're still trying to prove you're the best, you probably haven't learned enough yet. The words settled quietly between them. Later that afternoon, Colonel Nathan Brooks observed another training session from the tower. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes joined him. Nathan watched Claire patiently coaching another recruit. Interesting. Hayes smiled. What is? She teaches exactly the same way her grandfather did. Nathan folded his arms. One correction. One lesson. Then she lets the student earn the rest. Hayes nodded. That's why people remember instructors like them. Not because they produced good shooters. Because they produced confident soldiers. As the day ended, Claire closed the latches on her rifle case and prepared to leave. Several young recruits stepped aside as she walked past. None of them had been told to. None of them even realized they had done it. Respect had quietly become instinct. Tyler watched from the edge of the range. He smiled to himself. Months earlier, he had laughed at the quiet woman carrying a rifle case. Now, he found himself hoping future soldiers would never make the same mistake. The evening sun disappeared behind the distant hills. The steel target remained standing exactly where it always had. Silent. Patient. Waiting for tomorrow's lessons. And somewhere beyond the firing line, Claire Morgan walked calmly toward another ordinary day. Because extraordinary people rarely spend time reminding others who they are. They simply keep living in a way that makes everyone else remember. The loudest lesson on the range wasn't taught by a rifle. It was taught by the way one soldier lived after everyone finally noticed her. Nearly a month had passed since the qualification on Range 11. Fort Redstone had returned to its familiar rhythm of pre-dawn formations, maintenance checks, and long days beneath an open sky. The excitement surrounding Claire Morgan's remarkable first-round hit had faded into something quieter. Respect. It no longer came from surprise. It came from consistency. Claire's routine never changed. She still arrived before sunrise. Still checked every rifle with patient attention. Still stayed after training to help secure equipment before leaving the range. If someone had never heard the story, they would never guess she had become one of the most respected marksmen on the installation. One crisp morning, a nervous recruit struggled through his first precision shooting drill. His breathing was rushed. His shoulders remained tense. Each shot landed farther from the target than the last. Claire quietly knelt beside him. She never reached for the rifle. She never criticized him. Instead, she pointed toward a patch of tall grass moving gently beyond the firing line. "Watch that." The recruit looked confused. "The target?" Claire smiled softly. "No. The wind before the target." He watched carefully. For the first time, he noticed the movement. He adjusted. He fired. The distant steel answered with a clear metallic ring. His eyes widened. "I finally hit it." Claire nodded. "You did." She stood before he could thank her again and calmly walked toward the next firing position. Corporal Tyler Brooks watched the exchange from nearby. One of the newer soldiers asked quietly, "Did she teach everyone like that?" Tyler smiled. "No." The recruit looked puzzled. "No. She teaches everyone differently. But she respects everyone the same." Those words surprised even Tyler himself. Months earlier, he would never have understood them. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes joined him near the observation platform. "You've changed." Tyler looked toward Claire. "I had a good instructor." Hayes smiled knowingly. "The interesting part is she never tried to become one." The afternoon training ended beneath warm golden light. The recruits packed away rifles while instructors completed the final safety checks. Claire closed the latches on her rifle case. She looked briefly toward the distant steel target standing quietly against the hillside. Not with pride. Not with nostalgia. Simply with appreciation for another day of learning. As she started walking toward the parking area, the newest recruits naturally stepped aside. No one gave an order. No one saluted. No ceremony marked the moment. Respect had become something quieter than that. It had become instinct. Tyler watched her disappear beyond the range gate. He remembered the first words he had spoken when she arrived. "You're a sniper." Now those words felt impossibly small. Because the greatest thing Claire Morgan had ever proven wasn't that she could hit an impossible target. It was that extraordinary skill means very little without extraordinary character. And that was the lesson Fort Redstone would remember long after every bullet fired that day had disappeared into the distant hills. The strongest legacy is never carved into stone. It is carried quietly by the people who choose to live it every day. 1 year later, Fort Redstone welcomed another class of precision marksmanship candidates. The valley looked unchanged. Morning mist drifted across the ridgeline. The same steel target waited beneath the pale sunrise. The same wind moved through the tall grass exactly as it always had. Inside the precision marksmanship school, a single framed photograph hung near the entrance. It showed no medals. No ceremony. No applause. Only Claire Morgan lying calmly behind a precision rifle moments before a shot. Beneath the photograph rested a simple inscription. Respect is earned long before the trigger breaks. Every new student walked past those words before stepping onto the range. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes watched them quietly. Some paused to read the inscription. Others hurried past. Eventually, every one of them understood it. Outside, Claire continued teaching exactly as she always had. She corrected breathing. Adjusted support bags. Showed recruits how to read wind by watching grass instead of guessing. Every lesson remained patient. Every correction remained calm. She never reminded anyone about the shot that had made her famous across the battalion. She simply kept helping the next soldier become better than the one before. Corporal Tyler Brooks stood beside a group of new recruits watching her work. One young private whispered, "Is she really the sniper everyone talks about?" Tyler smiled. "Yes." The recruit frowned. "I expected someone louder." Tyler quietly shook his head. "So did I." He looked toward Claire. "That's why I was wrong." Across the range, a nervous recruit fired and struck the steel cleanly. He turned toward Claire with a grateful smile. "You taught me that." Claire smiled gently. "No. You learned it." Then she quietly walked toward another firing position. Colonel Nathan Brooks observed from the tower. Master Sergeant Hayes joined him. Nathan watched Claire disappear among the recruits. "She still acts like nobody knows who she is." Hayes smiled. "That's because she knows exactly who she is." Silence settled over the observation platform. The afternoon sun slowly lowered behind the distant hills. Training ended. The recruits packed away rifles. Wind flags fluttered softly in the evening breeze. Claire closed the latches on her rifle case and looked once toward the distant steel target where everything had begun. She didn't smile. She didn't pause. She simply turned and walked toward tomorrow. Years later, few soldiers remembered the exact distance of the target. Some forgot the weather. Others forgot the date. But everyone remembered the question that echoed across Range 11 that morning. "You're a sniper." They remembered the silence after the first bullet. More importantly, they remembered the woman who never allowed one remarkable shot to define her entire life. Because extraordinary skill earns admiration. Steady discipline earns trust. Quiet humility earns lasting respect. And in the end, the finest soldiers are never remembered because they demanded recognition. They are remembered because their character continued speaking long after the echo of the rifle had disappeared into the hills.